So over the course of the next 6 lectures, maybe 7 lectures, we're going to be doing a new site. We're going to have new site 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And again, we're going to be slowly building upon this challenge every single evening. So you can either start with a fresh new React app, or you can build upon the one you already have. So overview, in this challenge, we're going to be focused on creating 3 components that we'll later use as we create a new site similar to Reddit. The initial setup, we're going to create the new site using the create React app command. And then it says copy over the components from, so copy over the components and data directories under the source directory and replace the boilerplate app.js. So if I look in here, we have components. So you can look over here. We have the app.js, which looks like this is a class-based component. We have some data. So just JSON data to load like fake data. And then we have 3 components, app nav for like the nav bar, which is probably one of the things we might have to fill out. Article page, which again, we're probably gonna have to fill out a little bit because it's just an empty component. And article teaser, again, which is an empty component. So first thing I'm gonna do, I'm gonna fork this over.
Hey, Tom, I have a quick question.
Yes.
When we're doing this, if we are given an empty class and we want to change it into a functional component, can we do that?
Yep. So, and if you look all the way down here, it says, and like initially I'm probably going to do this in functional component, or I'm sorry, class-based components. And then at the end, I'm going to switch them all over to functional-based components. So, or
by the way, if I said Chad, I'm sorry. I feel like I just called you Chad.
Did you call me Chad?
I don't know. It's been a long day. So.
Yeah, I didn't even notice, so it's all right. So yeah, if you don't want to do it in class-based, definitely do it in functional. Just make it work. That's the first thing you should do, is just, especially since we're gearing or leaning more towards functional-based components, definitely feel free to just refactor it right away to functional-based components. So I'm new site 1. The reason why it's 2 is because I've got 2 of these on my local machine. So the first thing I'm going to do is open up should I zoom in a little bit? Is that better? Cool. First thing I'm going to do is git clone new site 1, cd in a new site, list everything out. And I'm going to open this up into a new VS Code window. All right. So initial setup, start by creating a new React app called npx create React app news site I. So if I open up the terminal again, I'm just going to do it directly inside of my new site app. So let's see if this allows me to do it. I might have to. Yep, I knew I was going to have to do that. So I'm going to have to switch my node version. So node version manager, NVM. I'm going to say use node version 16.-14. I think it's 2. All right, cool. And I can always just node V. And there we go. That's my new node version. And now let's go ahead and run that create React app. I might get an error. Yep. So cannot create a project name new site I, because naming restrictions no longer can contain capital letters. So it looks like when we initially wrote this material, we were able to use capital letters. So with that, I'm going to go into go ahead and change that commit. So there we go. All right. Does anybody have a preference? Should I do this in class-based components first and then switch it over to functional-based components at the end, or do it in functional-based components first and then switch it over to class-based components at the end? Anybody have a preference?
Functional first.
Sounds good. So everything is still loading. All right, cool. So I'm just going to CD into new site 1 right there so I can list everything out, and I'm in my source public node modules and my package.json. All right, so now it just says in your new project, copy over the components and data directories under the source directory and replace the boilerplate app.js with the one given here. All right, so I'm going to open up the source directory. Excuse me, I'm going to copy over the components. Whoop. It looks like it needs to go under the source directory. So there we go. So components and data, and then I'm just going to get rid of the app.js right there in my project and just copy the app.js. So now I guess I can just delete that source. Cool. So I've got this app.js. Looks like everything's in class-based components, if I recall. All right. So now I'm just going to npm start. I'm going to list everything out, npm start, just to get this up and running. Hopefully everything's working. If not, we'll debug and see what's going on. And we can kind of see what's happening. All right, so I've got 3 components showing up on the screen. I've got app nav component, article teaser, and article component. So if we go back to here, so the article teaser component should accept the following props from app.js. So it should accept the ID, title, and created date, and the handle, title, click as a property. So all these props will be passed in. Okay. So let's first look at our app.js, which is the top level component. And if we read through this, we have a class-based component. We have a constructor. So remember, the constructor is the equivalent of the dunder init method in a class in Python. So right as this component is instantiated or created, it immediately calls the constructor component. And this constructor component takes in props. We have super props. Looks like we have a variable called the random article index that generates a random number times news.length. So news is imported from that data news JSON. So if you look at our news JSON file, it looks like it's an array of objects, and each object in our JSON file has a abstract, byline, created date. I don't know what that is. Geofacet. So it looks like it's an article or a news article. It's got some multimedia in there. And yeah, and it's got publish date, section, short URL, and then here's the next one. So just a list of objects, and each object represents a news article. So this looks like it grabs, and that goes with the random article index. So we grab the length of the news.json array times, so this grabs a random index, and then random article grabs an actual article from a random article from this news.json. Then we instantiate state. State has some nav items. Nav items are imported from another JSON file, which is an array of objects, which has a label and a value. So the nav items, this is going to represent some nav items in the future. We have home, opinion, world, national, politics, upshot, New York region, and business. So these are going to be some nav items. So that's state. Then we also have an article state object that has an ID, title, abstract, byline, image. So it looks like this extracts some data from this random article. And then in our render method, which is always the last method that gets executed in a class-based component, and looks like we do some destructuring. We destructure the article and the nav items from state. And that's what we're passing in here. We have the app nav component. App nav component. So we have app nav component doing something here. So we can look at the app nav component. So I'm just going to bring that over here. So an app nav component is just an empty div. Article teaser component. We have article teaser right here. Article teaser, and that's an empty div. And the last one, we have the article component, which is right here, which is an empty div. All right. Did we say we were converting it over to a functional based component initially? Is that what we were doing?
Yeah.
All right. So it's pretty straightforward. There's like several steps in order to, I think there's 5 or 6 steps in order to change over a class-based component to a functional-based component. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to copy this down just to have this as a reference. And then I'm just going to comment this out. All right. And right down here, we're exporting the app component. So the first thing we're going to do, I'm going to create a functional based component. Const app equals a fat arrow component. I don't need this. Well, I'll mess with that later. So yeah, I don't need the constructor anymore because this again is a class or a functional based component. All right, I don't need this state anymore. Let's see how this is going to work. But we have state here, article. So we're going to have to use the use effect. I'm sorry, use state. And I'm going to say const nav items set nav items equals use state, and the initial value of nav items is nav items. All right, let's see if this will work as well. So if I move, might as well just do that. I just want to see if I'm going to have access to random article in this state. So I'm going to create another article state, set article equals use state. I'm just going to pass this entire object in the use state like so. And I can delete that. I can get rid of the render. It doesn't have the render. I can get rid of the closing bracket of the render method. I don't need to destructure anymore. I'm just gonna format document. There we go. Nav items. It's declared. That might give us an error. So it was used before it was defined. That doesn't make sense. Well, if everything is working correctly, I just want to see. Fine. So probably going to get some errors. But let's just see. All right. So if I open up the terminal, I'm going to get the same thing. So nav items. Order.
Is it because you're passing in nav items to define nav items?
That is right. So nav items JSON. So smart. Look at that. Perfect. So yeah, I just had to rename that. Nav items JSON. That's what I'm importing it. Okay, cool. So I just want to take a look at my React Dev Tools. I'm going to look at my components. So I've got my app component that consists of 3 components, which if I go back to the code, which consists of my app nav component, which I'm invoking here, my article teaser component, which is right here, and my article component. So I've got app nav, article teaser, and article component. So if I click on the app nav component, I can see what is being passed down as props. So props, handle, nav click, and nav items. So if I look over at app nav, nav items, handle, nav click, which is a function that takes in some clicked item and it just console logs clicked item. So that's what this is. You can see what the nav items are. If I look at the article teaser, takes in an ID, title, created date, handle, title, click, which is also a function that just console logs the article ID. So props, created date, or ID, title, created date, and handle, title, click. And last thing is my article component. Look here, you can see what is being displayed right there, or what's being passed in as props. But let's go ahead and look at the other 3 components. So the app nav, let's turn this into a class-based component, or I'm sorry, functional-based component. Const. Get rid of that render. And that's how you create a functional-based component. So create the article teaser, const, extends equals, make it a functional component and get rid of that render method at the end. There we go. And lastly, the article. Create a fat arrow functional based component. Whoop. All right. Any questions on what questions do you have about converting the components to functional based components?
At some point you said it's okay to mix, you could mix class-based and functional-based components.
Yep.
So would that still work if you had, so like in app.js, you've got the functional-based components up there as app, and then for like your article and article teaser, could you have all those as class-based as well?
Yep.
And then it was, okay, cool.
Yep, you can mix and match the component types, like class-based versus functional. Yeah. Because at the end of the day, they're all just components. They just, from a code base, one's a class and one's a function. It's just like in Django, when we're creating our view methods, we create, functional, just like function-based view methods, or we also can create class-based view methods. And you can mix and match.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yep, no problem.
So really the only difference is syntax. It doesn't really, class-based components really don't do anything for you. Is that correct?
I mean, correct. Like there's nothing you can't do with a functional and class. Like, so you can do everything that you used to be able to do in a class-based component, you can now do in a functional-based component. In the past, it wasn't always like that. So in the past in React, if you wanted to initiate state and do something at a different points in a life cycle, you always had to use class-based components. Like you wanted to have state and everything. Functional-based components used to be called dumb components because you couldn't initiate state in there. You couldn't kick off API requests from there. All the data for functional-based components was always passed down as props. But now, since everything's going towards functional-based components, React has developed ways and methods to create state and functional-based components using the useState hook, initiate different events at different points in a component lifecycle, using the useEffect hook as well. So that's what allows functional-based components to do everything that class-based components now can, that class-based components used to do. All right. So let's go back and look at the README. So the article teaser component should accept the following props ID. All right. So now it gives us some directions on what the component should look like. And it should look like display the title inside of an A1 tag. So inside of the article teaser, the article teaser is right here. It's going to be accepting some props like that. And I can just console log the props as well, just to make sure. So if I come back here and I look in the console, I can see in article teaser line 4, article teaser line 4, it's console logging the props. It should have an ID, title, created date, and handle, title, click. And now you can see here, I've got created date, handle, title, click, ID, and title. So it should display the title inside of an A1 or A tag. When the title A tag is clicked, it should call this dot props, this dot props dot ID. And this syntax is from a class-based component, so it might look different in a functional-based component. So let's go ahead and do that real quick. So we want an A tag, which is an href. I'm just going to do that for right now. And I'm going to make it say, should we destructure props up here?
Yes.
All right, so we're going to do const. We'll grab the ID, title, handle, title, click, and the created date equals props. So we destructured that. And so we can just display the title like so. If we come up here and look at it, we can see we've got the title right there. All right, but it also said when the A tag is clicked, it should call the handle title click method, and it should be and it should pass in the ID. So we can add an on click to the A tag, which calls handle title click and passes in the ID. But let's take a look at that. So I'm actually going to get rid of the strict mode. There we go. Notice when I immediately refresh this, it automatically is console logging the title click. So it's automatically executing this handle title click function that passes in the ID and console logs that. Why is that? Because I don't want that to happen. I want it to happen when I click that. So when I click it, nothing's happening. Does anybody know why?
Does that have to do with the component being rendered when it's initially mounted? And that function fires off?
Yeah, so if you're right here, I'm like invoking this function immediately right when the component renders or mounts. I can get away from that by creating a function that just returns this. So I can say like const execute func. I'm going to get rid of this here in a second, but just returns handle title click with the ID passed in. And with this, if I just pass that in there and I'm not invoking it, if I come over here and now I click it, it goes. It's firing. Because when I click that function, it calls this and then it calls that. So I can create a function, but this is a pretty small function. So I'm just going to create that function in here like so. So I just created a function, doesn't have a name. It's an anonymous function that just immediately invokes this when I click that button. So if I come back here and I refresh it, nothing shows up, but when I click on it, that shows up. What questions do you have about that?
How difficult would that be to test?
Not that difficult. You just have to learn how to use the testing framework, and you can do a mount like when this component is mounted, you can look at what functions fire. There's like a way to do that. Well. All right, let's look at the README to see what else we need. Oh, and it also says display the created date in a P tag. So I could just say P created date. Well, not the hell was that? Like so. If I come back here, and there we go. That's a horrible looking date. All right, so that's one component down. So next component 2 is the article component. In the app.js, you'll notice the article component is rendered as curly braces using the spread operator. So if you're using an object such as article is an object like so. If you want to spread that out, this is called the spread operator. So it's curly braces dot article, and it spreads it out. It spreads that this object out, ID, title, abstract, image, to essentially doing what this is doing here with the article teaser. It's this syntax and this syntax, or this is essentially doing the same thing. Here we're explicitly saying ID equals article.id, title equals article.title, created at equals article.created date, handle click, etc. But article, this is doing the same thing as essentially what that is doing. So that's called the spread syntax. So you can read more about here, MDN. Nice and easy, or it's a nice little thing. Makes your code a little more concise, but you don't necessarily know it's being passed down as props inside of this article unless you explicitly already kind of know. All right. So we're passing down these 5 attributes: title, created date, abstract, byline, and image. And byline and image are optional. So sometimes the data coming from the JSON might have it, or the API or whatever you're working with might have a value here. Other times it might not have a value here. So we might have to do some conditional rendering here. So here it says display title and H1 tag. So we can go ahead and go back to our code. So article, we can take in props. I won't destructure initially. We can do H1. So it'd be props dot title. So if we look over here at our app, here is our title now. Whoop. Right there. Create a date as a P1 tag. It's a P1 tag. Where'd that go? So there's our created date. Byline if exists. So, and all right. So how do I render the H2 tag byline if it exists?
Is it ternary?
Yep, I can use a ternary, or what is it? What else is that called?
Is it conditional rendering?
Yeah, is it the and a thing? I forget what it's called. Yeah, just conditional. I thought it was actually explicitly called something. Inline if with logical operator, whatever. Yeah, just conditional rendering. So I can say if byline exists, then render an H2 tag that has the byline. I guess it would be props. Props.byline. All right, so if I look over here, there's the byline. So if I keep refreshing, maybe the byline doesn't exist in some of them, but I don't really want to test that. What's the next one? Image if it exists, the value of the image should be set to the source attribute of the image. All right. So what am I doing? Let's just go ahead and console props. There's props. So we've got the image right there. So again, we're using conditional rendering. If the props.image exists, we're going to display an image tag. And the image tag in React is an open. Is it just props.image? And what am I missing here? I can have an alt. I'll just call the alt props.title just to keep it different. All right. So here we go. We've got the title, the created date, the byline, and we have this little image here. And lastly, I think there is a display the abstract, and there is no condition right there. So we say props dot abstract. And there we go. Title, created date, byline, image, and abstract. You can see what that consists of. So there we go. Yeah, whatever with that. Oh. So if I go back to the article, okay. What questions do you have about the article component? Right here. All right. Anybody have any questions about it?
Really quick. So at some point, I remember vaguely something about keys, and because we have an ID, we could end up setting our keys to the ID, right? Is that what we're going to be doing at some point?
Yes, because so you'll need a key if you have a list, if you're iterating through a list of components and displaying that list of components. So for like the article teaser component is only displaying a teaser of an article. And if we're creating a Reddit or news site that has a list of article teasers, the article teaser will eventually need a key on it.
And follow up. So, and is that because at some point it could grow or will eventually grow and we need to associate its key rather than like the index position?
Nope, that's just because of React when you're mounting components to the DOM. When you're interacting with those components, React doesn't know, you can't rely on it like the index. You have to rely on the key of that component. And that's just how React interacts with the DOM. It's, yeah.
Okay, thanks.
All right. Last one. So here's side note conditional rendering. Option one, we can use that logical operator and operator, or you can create like a helper function just says if something exists, render that child component or render that component. So here's some examples, or you can use a ternary operator. So last one, app nav takes an array of nav item objects. So here is where we're might need that key. So app nav component should return a nav component that contains A tags as children, one for every item in the props.nav items array. Map through this nav items to create an array of elements. So you can either create a list or you can use the map. You'll want to use a label property to display the example above as the text appears on the screen. At the same time, you'll want to attach an event listener to each A tag. That should call this .props handle nav click. All right. So last one, we'll do app nav. So I'm going to pass in props. I'm just going to console log props initially. So here, got handle nav click and nav items. So I can just say const display nav items. And I can return props. Sorry if you can hear my dogs. Nav items dot map. You can say nav item and index. And we can return an A tag that has the nav item, is it label? We can add an href initially just so it doesn't yell at us. Let's see what this does. And then at the very bottom, and I'll keep adding to this initially. I'll just call display nav items, invoke that. So here we go. We've got home. So right here, it says warning, each child in a list should have a unique key property. And that's because we have a list of A tags here. So I could say key equals index plus 1, because you usually want to start with 1. And typically in production, you don't want to use the index. You want to use some other unique identifier. And there are libraries that create a unique identifier for each element. So if I want to say like React key generator or React component key generator library. So here's an example. There might be stable keys, meaning you should assign key once in every item. So it's similar to that UUID and so like generate key. So you can generally it doesn't have to just be a singular number. You can actually create like a custom function that will generate a new key, such as like the date time or something like that. But this will work for us now. So if I come over here and refresh, everything is still working. I'm not getting any errors. But I think it says I need to attach an on click that will call handle nav click. So I can say on click equals handle nav click. Let's see if props.handle nav click. So if I come over here, props.handle nav click, it's not really what I want. So I can create a nav item dot, was it label or value? Like so. And now when I click that, I get home, opinion, world, national, politics, etc. All right. So, and I just want to make sure everything is done. So when you're all done, your data is displayed and you on click events are firing for your app nav links and your article teaser links. You should see the console logs. So if I do a hard refresh, we get home, these are links are working. If I click this, the IDs are working as well. All right. Any questions on these? Do you want me to convert these to class-based components, or should I just push this up with class-based components as an example, or should I convert them back to class-based components? Anybody have a preference? No. I'll just push them up. Last, I just want to kind of show you some libraries. So this time is really disgusting. Like you'll never see a timestamp of when that article exists like that. So we can use a library. Let's just say like React time display library. I don't know what. So best libraries for formatting date and time in React 2022. So we've got date FNS, weekly downloads. Let's go to the npm node package manager. So we have something like this. Maybe that will work. So you can tell it's a good app or a good library because it's got almost 14 million weekly downloads. There used to be a really good one called Moments.js. You can still works, but it does not there aren't any more updates going to this. So if you look at the docs, it's got a project status and it's not really working, or it's not being maintained. And it's called Moment. I just want to see if people are still using it. Yeah, look at this one, still has almost 19 million downloads, but you'll realize when you're in production code bases that you'll want to use libraries that are maintained. So this is one, we actually still use this in one of our production apps, but we can't just migrate away from it quite yet because it might break a lot of things in our production code base. So it still works for the time being, but I'm going to use this one, date FNS. I've never used it before. So I'm going to clear. I'm going to npm install that. And I'm going to see how to use it. I can go to the website. It's usually a GitHub repository. It's like low dash for dates. Let's see if this works. So I'm just gonna import it just like it's saying. And to test it out, do I have a date? So I'm going to import it up here. And where's an example? Format. Month, day, year. See if that works. So if I come over here, maybe it'll work, maybe it won't work. All right, does not work like that, doesn't like that. Invalid date time value. Crikeys. So it does not like that. Maybe if I say new date. There we go. But that's, oh, see, there we go. So now that's that new date. That's very nice. Pretty. Let's make it a little more pretty. Let's do the full month, the full day, and the full year. All right, that does not work. So use, instead of triple Ys. There we go. So there's that date. That's a lot nicer to read than that is. Let's go ahead and get rid of that. So anywhere I'm using dates, I'm going to go ahead and import this and use this date formatter. So it brings in this format method. All right, and there we go. That's a lot prettier from a date perspective. Any questions on this? Nope.
Did you have to use the new keyword to create the date object?
I
didn't
did.
catch it.
It looks like I did. Yep. So created the new date and I used the 4 M's for that will say the entire month. If I use 3 M's, I'll probably only use 3. So Feb 10th instead of February. Yeah.
If you use 2, does it give you the numerical?
Probably, yeah. So 02. So then
Okay.
I would have to do, yeah. Let's talk about React. Do you remember Bootstrap from way back when we were dealing with HTML? And
Yes.
so Bootstrap, what's really nice about React is because it's so popular. There's a Bootstrap equivalent to that in React. And React has a bunch of CSS frameworks, such as what is it called? There's Material UI, which is a really,
MUI.
I'm sorry, what was it? What was the other one?
MUI.
MUI. Is that Material UI?
Yeah.
Yeah, Material UI. This is a really popular one because it's more modern, is from like a design standpoint. So where Bootstrap CSS, it uses this class names to create your design. React CSS frameworks have components. So you can just import a component and you can use that component, such as like, where we got. So here's some inputs. Let's look at a button, for example. So here are the buttons that you can have. And it's literally just you import a button and you can look at the code. So you can import a button like so. And there you go. You have this button. Cool. It's really nice looking design. It's got some, shimmer and some, what is it? Like a splash to it. It's got everything. Switches, which are really cool, that you see a lot in apps. They've got sliders that you can use. It's got like everything. Pagination, modals. If you don't know what a modal is, like something like that. Drawers are really nice. So if I come from the left, you got like a menu. There's all kinds of stuff you can do with this. So you can literally use this as your design and just like not plug and play, but use Material UI to design your entire kind of web page. But Material UI, there is kind of a learning curve to it. It's not all easy, just because there's a lot of props and data. But there's other stuff. What's the other one? There's, I was going to say semantic UI, but that's not as popular. But again, it has a bunch of components. What's the other one? Crap. Tailwind? No, I don't think it's Tailwind. Tailwind's just a new way of. But let's go to Bootstrap. So React Bootstrap, they have two different libraries out there. There's React Bootstrap, which is the official React Bootstrap framework, the CSS framework. And then there's also React Strap, which is very similar, but it's, again, this is a third party one that isn't official. It looks like it's been updated. So this does look like Bootstrap, but if you do React Strap, like so, you can say, oh no, not React Strap, React Bootstrap. Getting started. You can npm install React Bootstrap and Bootstrap, and it's super easy. You literally just come down here, install that in your CSS, in your index.js. So let's just go ahead and do this real quick just to show you. So I'm going to go ahead and npm install React Bootstrap. And then down here, I'm going to import Bootstrap DS, whatever that is, into my index up here. Like so. start that again. And we can look at components. Whoop. Right here, and you can see all the different components that they have. So let's just go ahead and convert a card component like so into our article. So if I wanted to leverage a Bootstrap card, I can say import card from React Bootstrap like so. I don't need a button. I don't need to import a button. But in here, so card image, we can leverage this image right here. So instead of, in place of this image, I'm going to leverage the props.image. I don't think I need that. Card title, I can use title, some text. So maybe the byline will go here. So I can say props.byline. And then if there's a byline, display this text here. That's the byline. Let's go ahead and format this a little bit nicer. All right. So I don't need that H1 anymore. I can keep that date in here. But I'll just do that as a card text as well. So I got rid of that byline. Got rid of that image. And then I guess I can use that other p tag as text. So now let's take a look at my React app. Where did it go? Right there. That's a little bit better. Maybe that image is too big, but I've got, I can add some padding to it if I wanted to. Add some margin to it. So let's go ahead and format that a little bit. So there you can use React Bootstrap that you can style items with. Does anybody have any questions on React Bootstrap? No. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the